Top Bed Talk.
Welcome back to EBPOM USA 2022 here in Charlotte, North Carolina, the value proposition of perioperative care. I'm Desiree Chappell. I'm chairing this. Co-chairing this with me is co-chair of EBPOM, Saul Aronson. Hello, Saul.
Hey, Desiree. How you doing?
Good. Well, we've actually touched upon a little bit of this next session of how we really partner with industry to do what we do better and understand what the value proposition is.
It's about moving the dial.
It
and
is.
We just got to figure out how to do that
Absolutely.
best.
Well, here with Edwards Lifesciences is Patrick Farr. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Do you want to introduce the rest of your team?
Yeah, so I'm Patrick Farr from Professional Education with Critical Care in Edwards. This is Doug Marshall. Have you introduced yourself?
I'm Doug Marshall. I'm with Edwards Lifesciences. In our Outcomes Advisors group, I'm the Senior Director managing the eastern half of the United States.
I'm Sotiris Rompas. I lead Global Health Economics and Reimbursement for Edwards Critical Care, and I'm an economist by background. Great day so far, and thank you for having me once more here remotely to participate in the closing session with my Edwards colleagues and my EBPOM colleagues. So I think Saul and Desiree preempted this, but we want to give you a quick introduction on who are we as Edwards Critical Care and what we do. I want to take a minute to reflect on this emerging value equation in hemodynamic management and perioperative medicine within the broader context of what's happening in healthcare today. And then obviously we want to have a Q&A. In Edwards Critical Care, our vision is to improve the quality of care for millions of patients, about 15 million patients. About 1 million of those patients were actually COVID patients. And in the future, we hope that we create more accessible technologies for more patients. Our goal is to reach 20 million patients in 2025. We have a very strong history of innovation. We started back in 1972 with the Swan-Ganz catheter that I think you're all very familiar with. We transformed our portfolio from what we call core monitoring to smart monitoring, and especially with the launch of the Hemosphere Advanced Monitoring Platform in 2017, I think we can set a new standard for hemodynamic management technologies, both in the surgical and critical care settings. Our innovation doesn't stop here. We're moving towards a lot more smart AI-driven technologies, and we'll talk a little bit about an example. And also with our Viewfinder solution that was launched in the US in 2021, we hope that we connect providers better and help them do better real-time decision-making and alleviate some of the constraints that are faced right now, especially given the post-pandemic era with nurse shortages and staffing issues across the globe. A lot of the top health systems in the United States and across the world choose to partner with Edwards primarily for 3 reasons. The first is we are relentlessly focused on patients, but also we have a very innovation-driven culture. We believe we're leaders in the hemodynamic management and hemodynamic monitoring space. We are investing more than 15% of our revenues on a yearly basis in continuous R&D. We have a lot of emerging clinical and economic evidence and new studies. The latest example is the SMART BP trial. And of course, we invest a lot in working with providers in the field, and we spend a lot of time on education and training. We deliver a comprehensive portfolio of solutions combined with what we call all-in-one platform, starting with our Hemosphere monitor, coupled with our smart monitors and predictive software. I think we had some amazing panels today, and I think we talked about the healthcare environment overall. We're facing more economic pressure to deliver better care, to drive better outcomes. And I wanted just to call your attention into 4 dynamics that I personally think shaping the future right now. The first one is, of course, the global staffing shortages and rising labor costs that we're facing in healthcare and what's being termed now the Great Resignation. We see more shift to value-based care, a lot more integration between payers and providers, a lot more value-based care contracts. Now today, we're still in a fee-for-service environment, but we're seeing a lot more focus on value, and I think that's a trend that will continue. Data and digital transformation is really going to drive more clinical and operational efficiencies. And if we look at the latest trends in terms of investment in digital health and data and analytic solutions from all parts of the healthcare system, I think we're in the billions of dollars growing, double-digit over year in terms of investment. And that speaks to the transformation that's coming from a data and digital perspective. And the continuous focus on the healthcare consumer and the patient with digital first experience, virtual first health plans, a lot more need for transparency in terms of how patients and health consumers are requested to pay for healthcare, and a lot more personalized approaches. So with those 4 key dynamics in mind, we are Edwards Critical Care. We deliver value in at least 3 ways. And apart from the technology piece, the technological solutions I'll bring to market, we want to drive better care delivery and connectivity between providers. We want to assist with better decision making, especially in an environment right now where our nursing colleagues are asked to do a lot more with a lot less. We believe that technology and data has a role to play in what we call AI assisted real-time decision making. And of course, driving better clinical staff and patient experience, and all of this underlined by better quality and outcomes. But I think fundamentally, the theme that we're seeing is that technology has even a more important role to play if it's delivered correctly in partnership with the health systems. So a recent example of how technology can help is this idea of predicting hypotension. One of our latest innovations, the Hypotension Prediction Index, is basically focused on enabling the anesthesia provider to take action even before the event occurs. So as we talked about today, hypotension is very common. 8 out of 10 surgical patients will or may experience hypotension. It's a preventable harm, and that was spotlighted in the latest HHS-OIG report. And it can be devastating from an outcomes perspective. So patients coming out of surgery with more problems like acute kidney injury, and having also a significant impact on the cost of the procedure and the economics of the health system. So a technology like HPI can reduce hypotension by 58%. And I think this is just an example of what technology can do for providers and patients. Again, enabling the health systems and the providers to improve how they make decisions in real time. So I wanted to just give you that example from at least our current portfolio. I wanted to just go back to Desiree's opening remark and Saul's opening remark around how can we industry become better partner with health systems. I think there is no doubt that we have a lot of technological solutions, but I wanted to just turn to my colleagues and maybe have a Q&A around how can we set a common value-based agenda in a perioperative care and hemodynamic management? Are we focusing on the right pain points, and can we address those? And is technology really the solution? So those are just 3 questions that are top in mind for me, at least, and I would love to hear some reactions and comments from the group.
Thank you, Sotiris, so much for that presentation. And I think these are great questions to get us started. Do you guys want to kind of start?
I think it comes with defining value. In our space, we have so many different interactions across that perioperative continuum, whether it be optimizing the patient pre-induction a little earlier on in the case, operating during that time and really maintaining pressure and perfusion, or in the post-op course. And different service lines, different patients, and different providers see value along that whole continuum. So value is very different, I think, depending on who you're talking to, what service line, what institution, what healthcare system. So I think that's one of the problems that we face on a daily basis, especially when we're industry trying to support a physician, a hospital, a service line, a quality initiative. So it can be challenging, and even just coming up with a common definition of what are we trying to achieve. So at least within my scope with professional education, it's developing those tools to make sure that whatever the audience, whatever the outcome that's trying to be desired after the value is defined, how do we help that? We can put a device on a patient, but unless the clinician is effectively using that device, knows about the device, when it should be used, when it shouldn't be used, what kind of decisions can it help them enable, then it won't be beneficial, right? So we really need to make sure that they fully implement that tool and do so in a meaningful manner.
So I'm going to, I hope, stimulate discussion. Look, you're in the business of, you're in a business, and, healthcare providers, you would argue, I would argue, are in a business too. It's a compassionate business, but it's a business. Whereas yesterday, when our 2 businesses collided, interacted, the formula was different. It was a cost plus sort of formula. It was very simple. Always in the context of we want to do good, that's never been challenged and it shouldn't be challenged, but as a way more simple formula. The formula is different now. how do we transition our interactions with one another in a world where the formula is different, is I guess what I would throw out there as a, I hope, somewhat interesting, maybe provocative question. We talk about value all the time. What does that mean? Is dependent on who you're talking to and how they would perceive it. I think it's important. I will just finish my soliloquy by saying, I think it's important that industry exists because it does push the dial forward and allow us as providers to do more. But how can we support one another's missions of being viable businesses and yet still enable sustainability?
I'll take a shot at that. I've been associated with Edwards for a very long time. And as Sotiris put up here, you see the legacy of the critical care device business, right? Dating back to the early 70s with the Swan-Ganz catheter, to today, current day, where we're really investing a lot of money in predictive analytics, AI, et cetera. And the reason I go there is when I get together with key IDNs and key clinicians around the country, the first slide I put up in a discussion is data is the new currency. It's no longer satisfactory to develop a very good widget at a reasonable price point. It's most important that we're providing the data on the backside of that so that information is available to our clinicians sooner to be able to deal with potential complications or potential interactions that are going to be deleterious to the outcomes for our patients. And so my role at Edwards currently is to engage with clinicians and health systems in the eastern half of the United States in particular to deal with just that very fact and then develop proof sources on the backside of that.
Steve, you picked up the mic first.
As someone who uses this every day, a hemodynamic device every day, I often get pushback from colleagues who consider the cost of disposables when applying monitoring to their patients. What do you guys as clinicians think about that? What do you guys in the industry think about that? What type of stewards are we for disposables or cost containment, and what value does this have as far as quality goes?
I'll just take a quick shot at that. So I think we've conditioned the marketplace to pay attention first and foremost to the price of the widget. The role we're in now, and what I do is if we go in and lock arms as industry and clinician partners and we pick a service line and we're going to put a pilot together to develop a proof source, what we're willing to kind of push to the center of the table is let us work together in reducing complications. Let us work together in reducing length of stay. Let's ensure that we're taking variations and standardizing as much as we can the care path. And oh, by the way, if we're successful in doing that, then we potentially can have a positive impact on cost, right? And we don't do that, one way. We do that collaboratively with the customers so that when we're working through these pilot initiatives, if you will, as an example, that it's a very collaborative approach. And in the end, it's not a surprise to anybody as to what the outcome was. And I think when you get to that endpoint, if that's a positive experience, and education and training are key components of that, if that's a positive experience, although the cost and the contract is important, it's less so.
I agree. And I think at our facility, we've had these devices for a while, and some people use them a lot, and some people, like we've talked about earlier, think that they do it right all the time and don't need an advanced hemodynamic device. But I agree with that premise that let's trial this, see the outcomes, and then see its value. Yes. I don't know, Saul, do you have anything to add?
I would just use a metaphor, and I apologize ahead of time if it's a flippant metaphor. If you live, in the country and you want to get to the grocery store and it's a long way away, you drive your car there and you go to but if it costs you $8 a gallon for gas, that becomes, a more difficult decision. So if there was a battery option that costs something, but it was in the balance less, expensive or more of a value proposition, that would be a substitute. At some point, it may not be, and you decide you're going to walk, or do something. Sorry for this terrible metaphor, but I think what we need to, figure out is how do we talk to each other going forward, where the conversation is, we accept the problem as you live in the country and you got to get to the drugstore or the grocery store. That's a problem. That problem is never not going to be there. But how can we create solutions to make that problem work for everybody? How can we be in the business of giving you a solution that has a value? Let's define what that is. And I think that's the new way of talking to each other, because we have to talk to each other. Alan, you had some thoughts.
One of the phrases you used caught me, saying how we are trying to make the data available to the clinician. What we really need is workflow integration. We don't need new data. And if we have to go get the data, we're not using it. I mean, one extra click even, it's just not going to get used. It has to be integrated into our workflow, because we're getting all of these different widgets and all of these different scores and best practice advisories, and no one's going to use them. They're desensitized to them. So as you develop tools, you have to find a way, first of all, to make them as broadly applicable as possible. So we're not using 10 different tools for 10 different things. And then it's got to be integrated into the workflow so that you can't not see it. It's pushed to where you need it, and then it will influence behavior. If it's buried one level down in Epic, it's gone. Might as well be on Mars.
It kind of feels like to make it meaningful after the fact. So you have it, and I'm really referring to like HPI. You have this number, it's helping you drive practice in the operation, in the OR, but then how did it make a difference post-operatively? And I think having that meaningful data, I think is an important part that a lot of widgets do not do. I was actually thinking about Chris on this when it comes especially around enhanced recovery and some of the things that we do have to ask for capital to do. We have to ask for sometimes expensive drugs, sometimes expensive equipment. What is the value proposition from your point of view?
Yeah, it was said earlier in one of the presentations, but wearing my CMO hat or administrator hat, really the revenue and the fee-for-service front end really means a lot more than the savings on the back end, because there's a lot of confounding variables. I might not end up getting the savings, and it might not even be my fault. So that uncertainty is really hard for me to put my reputation on. If I sign on the dotted line that it's going to make money and then it's out of my hands. So I love seeing fee-for-service. I love seeing revenue on the front end. Also, when I'm buying things, clinical pathways are really important, because I can't, my biggest fear is off the shelf, somebody just grabbing it and using it for off-label things. That control and being able to standardize a workflow and saying, we always, at this institution, everyone uses it for this reason all the time. Then it's really easy to calculate the value. And if it has benefits, I can equate the benefits and say this happens. So again, getting into enhanced recovery pathways, getting into surgical home type models are super critical, because we can all sit together with our clinical experts and say, this is what we're going to do to standardize it. Here's our process measure to ensure adherence. Here's the outcome measure we're looking for on the back end. And here's the financial outcome measure that we hope to achieve. And we believe that if we get the right process measures, we're going to achieve that. And then we're either wrong if we get the process measure, or we pivot a little if we can't get that measure. So those are going through my head clinically, and what I like to see when we're coming through those.
Chris and or Alan and or whoever else wants to weigh in, I'll just start by saying an answer without a question is hollow. A solution without a problem is hollow. What are, in your opinion, today, those problems, those questions, those critical needs today?
I think as we're discharging people more earlier and doing more in an ambulatory environment, we really need to know when to reel the patient back in. We need to rescue them when they're getting ready to have their wound infection or their DVT or whatever, in advance of them actually having that complication. I think we are appropriately moving recovery out of the hospital. Good for us. But we've got to find a way to rescue patients. And so home monitoring, easy algorithms that push risk assessment back to you so you can bring someone back in, not to the emergency room, but to your clinic the day before they have the complication. That will be transformative, and it will reduce the cost of care because it will take the angst of sending someone home a little early away, make the decisions a little bit easier. I think that's a huge opportunity problem and probably soluble with simple stuff. You know, a little deviation in heart rate and temperature or something along those lines probably precedes most mitigatable complications.
Chris and Mark, I see you back there. Mark, you run a multi-state specialty practice. What are your problems that you have to deal with today?
It's hard when you talk to, executives in the hospital. And like Chris said, they're sometimes focused on what they could see, hear, and feel right at that moment. And going over the longitudinal outcomes that patients could realize or avoid and what the pecuniary aspects of those are, if they're realized or avoided, it's hard for them to understand that. And that's true for fairly sophisticated C-suites and those that perhaps are less so. And the biggest challenge is not the awareness, because most of them are aware of what we all talk about and do here. It's recognizing and appreciating that longitudinal result that could result from best practices in evidence-based medicine.
What about on a day-to-day basis, just worrying about if you have enough people to cover the rooms that you're expected to cover? I mean, the staff burden.
There's catastrophic shortages out there, catastrophic. And across the country, in every hamlet, in every city, in every state, in every region, and from shore to shore, it is terrible. And there are many solutions that could be developed, but it's difficult when the number of ACGME spots don't keep up. It takes years to develop residency programs. It takes years to develop CERN-8 programs. And, the only thing we could do, at least on our end, is tell facilities to brace for impact. Brace for impact, because it's only going to get a little worse. I think that's sort of what keeps me up at night. And I think perioperative medicine is a solution. Because I think if we see patients in the clinic, we schedule them into the surgeon's block. Now we go from utilization maybe of 40% to 80%. You do that across a whole surgical staff. Maybe you could go down by 2 rooms. Now maybe you could take a sedation service like I know Monty has educated me on and convert some of those cases to RN sedation. And that's where I think monitors like the Smart BP could really be helpful.
How often do you have to utilize travelers or locums or not familiar people to keep your trains running on time?
On a facility by facility basis? Yep. Almost 100%. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, some facilities maybe 1 or 2, but others it could be 5 or 6. I mean, it's huge, and that's due to the economics of compensation that people could realize if they're independent contractors or locums versus W-2. I do think these monitors and things like Monty said and other things that perioperative medicine does can have a really active role to play here to help mitigate some of these things, and it's a solution. There's not a lot we could offer like facilities when staffing is so bad and short. But this is one thing that we could say when we say brace for impact, but we could do these things that help. And I think that's where things like the monitor, what Monty said, what Chris has said could be very helpful.
Chris, how comfortable are you on, a day-to-day basis taking care of patients with somebody who you've worked with for 10 years and, went to their son's bar mitzvah, or somebody who you've never met before, and yet you still have that same burden and responsibility to just take care of a patient? What's your stress level? What's your endorphin level looking like when you're in the latter scenario?
It's a difference in night and day. Your mental work goes up tenfold at a minimum. It's a much more stressful day to deal with that when you don't have the people you're normally with, and that is complicated in the operating room. And it's also complicated on the nursing floor. We worry about floor patients that may have just gotten a TURP and they're pulling out a Foley when they shouldn't. A lot of protocols. So these travelers do necessitate the need for good clinical pathways and reproducible care to be delivered. And so I think over time, we have to create pathways. We have to educate providers on what we expect and what equipment should be used each time and the defined benefit we're expecting there. And I think over time too, I would love to see the incorporation of what we're talking about in peri-op to really merge with what they're doing in the population health world. I think the more we move these two together and the more we're focusing on, again, the patient at the middle, putting the patient in the middle and really working on them and their overall health, the more we're going to be able to move forward.
So I was just going to kind of throw it back to the Edwards folks here. I mean, what is your response to some of the things that you've been hearing? Because, I mean, I feel like these are conversations that are really important and drive what you guys do.
Those are all the challenges I think industry faces when we're trying to figure out how to best support and partner implementation of these, quite frankly, disruptive technologies. These are not easy things. These are no longer widgets. These are complicated solutions. So trying to figure out what is the finish line? What are we trying to achieve? What is the best pathway there? Those are not pre-prescribed. Those are of value to each unique implementation. So whether it's education, whether it's defining all of that at the beginning and then really being a partner rather than being prescriptive and say, here's a published protocol, use it this way and you'll have a 10% reduction in hair color. Those kind of things, you're going to be able to really have a meaningful conversation. You have your metrics predefined, and then especially if the technology is new, it'll prove whether the technology works. Is it usable? Can it be implemented into your workflow appropriately to all those things we just talked about? But ultimately, the end result isn't that everybody likes it and everybody finds personal value. Doesn't move the needle with the patients. Does it hit some of those things? Because C-suite has a different value. The nurse using it in the ICU has a different value. The anesthesiologist has a different value. And the turnover OR nurse has a different value, right? If it's taken 30 minutes to set up versus if it takes 30 minutes off the setup, those are all different values to different people. And we have to tackle every single one of those when we go in. So really, who are the appropriate stakeholders? Can we make decisions quickly? And does everybody know their piece of it and have their expertise up front rather than 6 months into a use? Why do we bring it in? What's the value? Why are we using this again? Those are the things that linger on. So how can we accelerate that? So I think those are the questions that we really like to tease out, and how do we get better and how do we make that process shorter instead of over a 6, a 12, and 18-month period of time? Because I think the quicker you get up to speed and the more efficient you are, you start to realize those gains earlier, and then they're only magnified over time because it takes a while for these things to be put in, at least with our technologies. But I believe most technologies are probably pretty similar in complexity, right? Yeah. When we're speaking agnostic to Edwards.
Sotiris.
The one thing that really illuminating to me and confirms some of the things that we understand to be true in the health system and we haven't maybe acted correctly is this concept of showing length of stay reduction or over-focusing on longitudinal outcomes. I think the point that was made earlier around in the here and now, how do we drive more value? In terms of shortages, can we elevate these technologies with human skills, which we can also bring and co-create together a solution that says, okay, we're going to empower all our nursing staff to operate in the best of their ability, because that's, I think, what we're really talking about here. And can we drive not only savings, but reputational benefits for the hospitals and the health systems, because they also compete for market share and they also compete for patients. So we talked about the robot before being the shiny object that attracts patients in. With all due respect to the robotic companies, if you run the economics, optimize your perioperative space, and hemodynamic management can actually drive a lot more results, and it's not just cost reduction. So that to me was illuminating, and thanks for making that point.
I would just say, in addition, some things that I heard that we would 100% concur with. Number one, the conversation is different today, and we need to be very open with our dialogue and trying to solve real problems. We recognize fully that we're working in a really complex healthcare environment. There's a lot of stresses on the healthcare system today. A point I just heard a moment ago, and I would speak to, is like in some of the activities, the prevalence of travelers throughout the health systems now has created the need of dealing with much more standardized pathways, the need for training and education so that you can minimize those variations, right? And I think when we start to look at ways to get at some of those problems and deal with real problems that hospitals are facing today and do it iteratively versus trying to, eat the whole elephant, do it a bite at a time. It gives ourselves a chance to, generate more momentum and solving a lot of problems together.
That's good. Monty.
Absolutely agree.
So, Monty Mython. So making a comment which I think aligns with all of this, the recent experiences back in the UK, both from the point of view of writing business cases for, new kit, new drugs, new working spaces, and or some of my colleagues being awarded recently some very substantial program grants. The new kid on the block is staffing ratios, staffing experience, staffing retention that continues to provide existing levels of quality, safety, value, and patient satisfaction. So we're not necessarily offering improvement at the moment. We're saying, can we match what we were doing a couple of years ago?
So interesting. As director of quality for North Star, as someone really involved at my own local facility, and as we have had to use a ton of local providers in recent time, my thought is we make, let's say, advanced hemodynamic monitoring a standard for a certain type of patient, like I know I can ensure that we will not see, hypotension in excess. And I don't know, I just, sitting here thinking, I'm like, it's a really great idea, especially as we know we're still going to continue with locums.
I'm just trying to give a prioritization of the problem. So the round peg is going to fit the round hole, because otherwise you're going to be beating your head against the wall trying to put the square peg that is so cool in the round hole, because it isn't going to fit. And right now, today, the crisis that everybody can immediately resonate with is we just don't have enough people. Mm-hmm. We may have to close Ward 7W because we don't have enough nurses, and that's bad. So that's imminent, and that's, on everyone's fore. In addition, and maybe it's right below that, is we're having increasingly more and more penetration of the value-based, risk-bearing care contracts. And so we're being measured more and more by providing better quality with equal or hopefully less resource. So how do we do that well? And what can we do differently, albeit process or care maps or utilization of technologies that truly, truly add that value? And then maybe just below that or tied is how do we manage the migration of traditional surgical care to the least costly environments? That could even include home if you be very bold in that discussion. So if I were to talk to industry right now, I'd say those are the problems. So I just told you what the round holes are. So give me a round peg, because I'm really interested in a round peg that will fit that round hole.
Yeah, that's good.
I think you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
I just think he gave us the manuscript, and I think that's exactly, not to just make it a simple yes, but that is exactly how Edwards is looking at this. And we're trying to come together with solutions and technology and resources that will get at problems in our lane, right? We can't solve them all, but in our lane.
Yeah.
Thank
Patrick?
you.
Couldn't agree more. It's complex, and again, everyone deserves blood pressure. Perfusion is kind of our stance. Yeah. We know bad things happen when you don't pay attention to the details, and I think one of the value adds is continuous monitoring. It was alluded to in another session or 3 or 4 today. If you're only doing intermittent and the intermittent is really far apart, you don't really see what's happening in between. So I think as we get continuous monitoring in all phases, whether it's continuous glucose monitoring, continuous blood pressure, blood flow, tissue oximetry, lactate, all of those things, we're learning a lot more about some of the larger picture and how those things relate to what's going on. So I think that's going to be another avenue to where it's no longer, we're coming in and saying hypotension's bad. We're now have the ability to come in and say, here are your individual hypotension rate for your last 12 cases. And so it's no longer this concept, it's individual and it's personalized. So I think that's one avenue that we didn't really talk about is, I think we're starting to get to that level of data of being able to see in your own practice, as was talked about with the big, data consortium, 30% of people had more than 15 minutes in hypotension, whether it was a 60-minute case or a 9-hour case. And 90% of patients out there having any kind of surgery have it at least for a few minutes. So being able to really take it back to your own individual practice, because it's individualized medicine, but also looking at it from a larger framework to make it real and how does it impact me as an individual? I think that's important. And also the other part of the industry and the hospital's data sharing. So how do you know if you're doing these things well that you're actually seeing an outcome? especially from an anesthesia where you drop your patient off and you don't see the patient again. Does what you do matter? Absolutely. How do we connect those dots so everyone's having the same conversation? I think that's really powerful partnership that needs to be kind of really evolved over the next few years.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sotiris, our virtual guest, any final quick thought?
I just want to thank you, Desiree and Sol, and everyone in the room to giving us the platform to talk about Edwards Critical Care. And then just I hope we went through this and you realize that we want to be partners. And thank you for all the time and the open dialogue.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Doug, Patrick, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm glad we had some good conversations. We always want to continue this conversation. So there's always, I feel like, an open forum with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Saul, it's been a pleasure. I'm going to hand it over to you guys or Monty or Saul to close this baby out.
We're going to do this very efficiently. Thank you, Desiree. Thank you, Monty. Thank you, everybody, for engaging, participating, elevating the discussion. We scratched the surface of these questions. I would suspect we will revisit them soon. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Cheers to you all. Thank you so much.
Top Med Talk. Thanks for downloading Top Med Talk. Don't forget to subscribe via your podcatcher. Don't forget to check us out on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And also, don't forget, Top Med Talk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that. If you check out ebpom.org, you can find low prices on some of the conferences we're organising around the world. Many of them are virtual and don't even involve you leaving your own home. Check out ebpom.org now.